Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're a peach grower, you already know the stakes. We put so much time and love into our trees, all for that beautiful, juicy harvest. But today, we're talking about an invisible, totally relentless enemy that threatens orchards all over the world. We're going to break down the exact science, the precise timeline, and the most effective strategies you can use to protect your trees from peach leaf curl. So settle in because we've got some fascinating and seriously crucial ground to cover.
Picture this. Have you ever walked out into your orchard on a gorgeous spring morning, looked really closely at your newly emerging foliage, and just felt your heart sink? Because instead of those vibrant, healthy green leaves you were expecting, you're spotting puckered, abnormally thick leaves tinted with this alarming red or yellow color. If you've actually seen this in your own yard, you know exactly how frustrating it is.
Well, here is the startling reality that catches so many growers completely off guard. If you can actually see those deformed leaves, it is biologically impossible to cure them. Seriously, there is no magical therapeutic treatment that can reverse the damage at this point. The fungus has already infiltrated the plant tissue, and honestly, no amount of spraying is going to fix those leaves. This is where our ticking clock starts. Managing this disease, it's entirely about beating the clock. Section 1. The leaf curl thread. Let's understand exactly what we're up against. Okay, the culprit here is a fungus called Taphrina deformans. This is an aggressive pathogen that actually overwinters right on the bark and tucked inside the bud scales of your peach and nectarine trees. When spring rolls around, it launches an attack on the early foliage, causing what's called cell hypertrophy. Basically, the plant cells abnormally enlarge and divide like crazy, which creates those thick, wavy, blistered leaves you see. Those damaged tissues rapidly lose their chlorophyll, completely wrecking the tree's ability to photosynthesize and make energy. And make no mistake, this is a high-alert situation. It's really not just about losing this year's fruit. When those infected leaves eventually die and drop off in early summer, the tree is thrown into a massive energy deficit. It has to desperately pull from its emergency carbohydrate reserves just to push out a second flush of leaves. If this kind of severe defoliation happens over successive seasons, the tree becomes so weak and starved that it can literally die. So you aren't just saving a harvest here, you are fighting to save the life of the tree itself. Section 2. Timing is everything. Let's look at the biological timer we're working against. Everything we do is strictly dictated by the fungal life cycle. You basically have two and only two primary windows to strike. The first window opens in autumn, right as the tree is entering dormancy. Specifically, you want to aim for when about 60 to 80% of the leaves have fallen. Knocking it back then reduces the overwintering population. But your second and absolutely critical make or break window is in early spring, just before or right exactly at the bud swell or green cone phase. Once that bud actually opens up and exposed green tissue is visible, that window slams completely shut. So what triggers the fungus to suddenly activate in the spring? It's a combination of temperature and moisture. 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly 10 to 21 degrees Celsius, is the ultimate danger zone. In that specific temperature sweet spot, combined with wet spring rain, those dormant spores just multiply like crazy. The rain literally acts like a delivery vehicle, washing the spores right down into the swelling buds to infect all that tender new growth. But here's an interesting twist. The fungus actually has its own environmental limits. Once the weather dries out and temperatures climb up between 79 and 87 degrees Fahrenheit, the fungal activity just completely halts. But, and this is a massive but, you absolutely cannot just wait around for warm weather to save your tree. By the time it actually gets that warm outside, the spring infection has already done its dirty work, the leaves are ruined, and your harvest is toast for the year. Section 3. Fungicides and preparation. Let's talk about choosing the right tools. Depending on how you manage your orchard, you've got a very specific chemical arsenal available. You have contact protectants like copper hydroxide and chlorothalonil. These work by sitting right on the outside of the bark and neutralizing spores before they can ever enter the plant tissue. Now, these have to be applied strictly before bud swell. On the other hand, you have slightly different tools like dodine. Dodine has locally systemic properties, meaning it can be used right at the very beginning of bud swell. The takeaway here? Every active ingredient has a unique mechanism, so matching your chemical to your exact timing phase is absolutely paramount. Now, whether you lean towards organic methods or conventional synthetics, you've got viable options. A really common organic strategy is pairing a fixed copper fungicide with a 1% horticultural oil. The oil basically just helps the copper stick to the branches through the weather. It's super effective, though you do need to keep in mind that years of heady copper use can eventually lead to soil buildup.
On the synthetic side, systemic options like difenoconazole offer incredibly strong protection, but they demand borderline perfect timing, usually during that precise mouse ear or pink cone phase, to actually work the way they're supposed to.
Section 4. Step-by-step spraying process. Because having the right chemical means nothing if the application is wrong.
All right, let's get into the actionable steps. First off, you need to wait for a calm, dry day where the temperature is dependably above freezing, ideally hovering around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Second, mix your fungicide exactly to the label's specifications. Don't eyeball it. Third, and I cannot stress this enough, you must completely drench the tree. We're talking from the tip of the absolute highest twig all the way down to the base of the trunk. Finally, give that solution enough time to dry completely on the tree before any rain rolls in or before temperatures take a dive below freezing.
I actually want to pause right here because we need to talk about the single most common mistake beginners make: incomplete coverage. Look, if you only spray one side of the tree, or if you're using a super fine mist that just kind of floats by instead of thoroughly wetting the bark, you are leaving safe havens for those overwintering spores. The fungus will literally just migrate from the dry spots straight into the nearest swelling bud, and boom, all your hard work is completely wasted. Section 5. Alternative preventative measures. Building a complete, year-round defense strategy. Spraying is huge, but it's not everything. There are cultural practices that significantly boost your tree's overall resilience. For example, if your tree does get hit with an infection and drops its leaves, you need to get out there and hand-thin the fruit to reduce the metabolic stress on the tree. You should also make it a habit to physically plow or bury fallen leaves in March. This directly destroys the fungal spores resting on them. Make sure you're irrigating regularly so a struggling tree doesn't also have to fight drought stress. And then there is the absolute golden rule of fertilizing. Now, you might be looking at that date and wondering, why cut off nitrogen applications by exactly June 15th? Well, if you hit the tree with fertilizer late in the summer, it's going to push out a bunch of new, tender, green vegetative growth right at the end of the season. The problem is that new wood simply won't have the time it needs to harden off and become truly woody before winter hits. When that first deep freeze arrives, those tender shoots are going to suffer massive damage. So believe it or not, how you feed your tree in the summer directly dictates whether it survives the winter. Section 6. Recap and local advice. Let's summarize the path to a healthy harvest.
Okay, the winning strategy here completely revolves around respecting that biological clock. You have got to recognize and hit that absolute before buds swell deadline. Pick a fungicide that makes sense for your organic or synthetic preferences and matches the exact phase of your tree's development. When you actually spray, you're aiming for 100% canopy coverage, no exceptions. And finally, you back all of this up by supporting the tree's immune system year-round with smart pruning, good sanitation, and perfectly timed fertilizing.
One absolutely vital caveat to keep in your back pocket: while the biology of this fungus is universal, your local climate definitely is not. I mean, spring arrives in February for some of us and not until May for others. So please always consult with your local agricultural extensions or gardening experts. They're the ones who can give you the highly tailored, region-specific advice you need to adapt this entire timeline perfectly to your own backyard. So there you have it. We've walked through the life cycle, we've broken down the chemical arsenal, and we've hammered home those critical biological deadlines. Right now, that fungus is just waiting, dormant on the bark, and that timer is ticking. But you're armed with the precise knowledge of exactly when and how to strike back. So the only question left for you is, are you going to get out there and beat the clock to save your peach harvest this year? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and hey, happy growing out there.